Hello, everyone. This is Zach with Payne Resource, and today I am very honored to be joined by retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Dr. William J. Lennox, Jr. Dr. Lennox served as the 56th Superintendent of the United States Military Academy at West Point from 2001 to 2006. Over his 35-year military career, Dr. Lennox has received numerous awards, medals, and commendations for his exceptional service, including the Defense Distinguished Service and Meritorious Service Medals. Currently, Dr. Lennox serves as the ambassador for the Veteran Addiction Recovery Center Heroes Mile, where he helps veterans achieve sobriety and work through the underlying causes of addiction through veteran-to-veteran support. Dr. Lennox, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an honor. I'm very thankful for you to take the time out of your day to speak with me.
Hey, thanks, Zach. Appreciate it, and
Yeah.
look forward to it.
So I think a great place to start would be to just get to know a little bit more about yourself. I understand you are from Yonkers, New York. Is that correct?
Yonkers, New York, right outside New York City.
Very nice. So could you tell me a little bit about how that was growing up in New York and how you eventually came to the military academy?
My family was from that area, so growing up in that area, had a lot of relatives, and I think in preparing me for West Point, a lot of my relatives and parents were in World War II. Dad was in the Army during that time. I had uncles in the Air Force, Army Air Corps at that time, and then transitioned into the Air Force, the Navy. I had grandfather that was 48 years in the Navy, both active and reserve, 2 world wars. So while not really a military family, it certainly had the influence there, and I think that played a part in it. I had a great childhood. I have 5 brothers and sisters, so we had one of those middle class Catholic families growing up. Ended up in high school in Cardinal Hayes in the South Bronx there. Great academic program, good sports. I played football and track, and a lot of discipline.
I can imagine, yeah.
That prepared me for West Point pretty well.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask. So was West Point something that you kind of always knew that you wanted to do, or was it something you more or less stumbled into, for lack of a better words?
It was always in the back of my mind. I did look at civilian colleges, did well enough to make a number of them, and but that was always in the back of my mind. And I think it was the relationships with my dad, with his father, and the uncles that really influenced me. Also, Vietnam was on at the time, and there was um, I was a patriotic kid, and felt I ought to do something. I never made it to Vietnam because I chose it, but as I was going through Airborne Ranger and the artillery school, the unit got pulled back. It was at the end of the Vietnam era.
So moving into West Point, so I understand you got your BS in International Affairs from West Point. Could you talk about your years there and why you chose that route of study as opposed to alternative routes?
Well, West Point had a great academic program. I did concentrate in international affairs. I had 4 years of Chinese. I thought that was good preparation for what I was going to be doing. And probably the most influential thing preparing me for the military was the leadership opportunities that the academy gave me, putting me in different leadership positions where you could make mistakes, you could learn from them. It still does a fantastic job at that. So I would recommend the academy for anybody that's interested in a life that is dedicated to serving the country. And if you want that leadership boost that it gives you, if you want the academic program and the physical program, you want to be working outside and doing something other than a desk job for the rest of your life, it's a great opportunity.
On that same leadership tone, do you feel that the military academy at West Point, do you think that played a role in your progression throughout the ranks of the military?
Oh,
Or,
sure.
yeah?
Sure it
Could,
did. They give you an opportunity to start on your leadership career, if you will. And I think people just accept the progressive changes and the development that goes on there. And it took me a while, probably about 4 or 5 years, looking back on West Point, what it had given me, that I fully understood the real boost that it gave me in that particular area. And the Army continues that. It'll start you with 30 people in a platoon, up to 100 people in a company, and then on up after that. So it allows you to cut your teeth, if you will, on the smaller units, and then move on up to take even the largest.
After West Point, you graduated in what year was it again from West Point?
1971.
71. What was that initial jump out of the academy? Where did you find yourself immediately after graduating?
Found myself in airborne and ranger school. Tough environment, but again, I think the academy gives you that grit that allows you to muck your way through and do well in those tough circumstances. And after a couple months of that, I got married and went on to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for artillery school. They give you the technical background so that you can go into a unit and really make a difference. And that's the point where I understood that the 173rd Airborne that I was going to in Vietnam came back to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I ended up at Fort Carson, Colorado.
So let's talk a little bit more about the progression through the ranks of the military. As we mentioned at the top of the interview, lieutenant general is quite high. I mean, could you talk about kind of that road to lieutenant general and how you came to be to get there? Sorry,
Well, it's progressive. It took me a few years to get there,
just a
but
few.
I started out as a fire support officer where I really had just a couple folks, and we were the ones that adjusted the artillery for the infantry and the armor. Then moved up, and I was an executive officer where we had 100 people in the battery, and then took over a battery at Fort Carson. It was a tough battery. I'd asked for a line unit and got a line unit when it came open. Some people were relieved and had to work through the challenges of that. Learned a lot. Learned a lot that would carry over into battalion command down the road and some of the higher commands. Really learned that you had to. The Army has a saying: mission first, people always. And it's the balancing the mission and the people that really makes a difference and really allows you to develop a good, solid unit.
That's awesome. So, on the tone of learning, I understand in '82, I believe you attended Princeton, where you got your PhD in English. How did you work in the time to get a PhD while in active duty, and what was that like, and why English?
Well, that's a great question, and it goes to West Point itself. West Point has an interesting faculty. It's made up of military folks with their doctorate in the field and civilians with doctorates in the field. That's about 50, 60%. The rest are young captains and majors coming out of the field that they send to a good university for 2 years to develop them in that particular area so they can go back and teach. They teach under the guidelines of that PhD faculty, keeping an eye on them. But at the same time, they bring the fresh ideas out of the universities that they just attended. So they enrich the courses that are being taught there. So it's a very good faculty system. So they sent me to Princeton for 2 years, 77 to 79. And then I taught for 3 years at the academy. And that's where I finished up the doctorate and got it in '82 before being deployed to Europe and to another artillery unit.
That sounds like a busy period. And your dissertation, I believe, it was titled American War Poetry. Could you speak a little bit about that and why you chose that route for your dissertation?
Sure. One of the things we try to do in the classroom is take the romance out of war for some of these young cadets. We want them to experience the realism, the toughness of what they would encounter in combat. And nothing does that better than the war poetry. So it kept me close to my chosen career as I was going through the academic part of my career. and at the same time gave me a background to carry into the classroom the toughness of what these young cadets were going to face later on.
Coming full circle, it seems like your 35-year career came full circle back to West Point. I understand you were as I mentioned, the 56th superintendent of West Point from '01 to '06, I believe. Uh,
Yes.
how did that come about? Was it something that you had always wanted to kind of come back to, and what did that feel like to go back to West Point after all those years?
Well, it was a great lesson in being flexible in your career. Uh, I was, there were a number of twists and turns in that career,
Hmm.
mostly sticking with the field artillery. I commanded at every level in the field artillery. But once I got beyond that, I was chief of staff at Fort Hood, and then the operations officer in Korea. Tough, but very rewarding job working with the South Korean Army and Air Force, and just some amazing Americans and Koreans. Quite a bond over there. Um, at one point there, I was pulled back to run Army's congressional liaison. So one war zone into another war zone in Washington, D.C., and got a lot of background. I dreaded that at first. I wanted to stay in Korea and work the war plan,
Hmm.
but you salute and go where the Army wants you.
Hmm.
So I ended up Washington, D.C., and I stayed there for almost 2 years. Before one night, the chief of staff of the Army called me up at 6 p.m. while I was in the office and ran upstairs with my pad in hand, ready to talk to General Shinseki. And he surprised me. He said, "You've been selected by the four stars to go up and take West Point." And
Wow.
I was shocked at the time. I had to redo my thinking. I was looking forward to taking a division if I could,
Mm.
but and that would have been the normal progression for a combat arms officer. Um, and I was surprised and honored
Mm.
to be selected.
Yeah, and so I want to touch on it in a little bit, but we've already covered going to West Point and going to Princeton. I feel like there's this theme throughout your life of education and a love for education. Do you feel that that played or that helped you in your role as superintendent at West Point?
Oh, sure it did. I think going into the academy with a doctorate, and if you take a look at most college presidents, they'll have their PhD
Mm.
and that. So I think coming in with that, I had the respect of the faculty to begin with, and I think that that played an important part in working with them. And at the same time, I had the military background, serving in the artillery, Korea, and the rest, that that I could play on the side of the military also. So I think that yeah, it did play a part. It was important.
Thank you. So moving on just a little bit, as we had mentioned a couple times now, Lieutenant, you reached the rank of Lieutenant General, 35 years in the military, and that also came with a very impressive collection of medals and accommodations and accolades and all of that. While there's no doubt, significance to all of those, could you speak to some of the medals you've earned? I know we probably don't have time to go through all of them, but some of the medals that you've received and the significance of those, and which ones, looking back on your career, are like that gold stamp on your career.
Uh, the medals are not very important, but what they do is they tell another military person it's your bio right on your uniform. They know
Hmm.
where you've been, what you've done, and can read it pretty well. Um, but for the most part, it's the units that I remember. It's the people that I remember where we made a difference. Taking a battalion that was having trouble shooting and just trouble in general, and being able to take them and improve them in every way so that they could do their combat mission and also be very proud of themselves. That was something that was very big. And again, it's the mission and the people. Uh, it's the ability to communicate that mission to the people and have them working together and taking care of each other and taking care of the mission.
Leads me right into my next question. Kind of almost answered it, but I still have to ask. Looking back on almost 4 decades of service, what are some of your proudest accomplishments in the Army? Obviously, reaching such a high rank is obviously up there, but like you had mentioned, taking a battalion and helping and fixing that and serving. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of your proudest accomplishment.
Well, again, it's the people that you're working with that really make a difference. I'll take West Point. West Point was interesting because I took West Point 2 months before 9/11. And at West Point, you sort of concentrate on the academics and the physical, and sometimes the military is secondary or tertiary. Uh, Here, 9/11 occurred, and my first talk to the cadets in mass was in the mess hall, and it was impromptu because many of the cadets wanted to leave West Point right away and join the military. So they were trying to migrate right in without waiting the 2, 3, or 4 years that they would have had to wait to get into the fight. And I had to get up there and tell them patience, patience. In fact, I told them tactical patience, just wait. Your opportunity is going to come, and darned if it didn't. Many of those young ones served 2, 3, 4 tours in Iraq or Afghanistan. So taking them through that and really re-emphasizing the military side was very important, and we did a good job in that. In addition, that first year was very busy because it was also the 200th anniversary of West Point. And we did everything from have big celebrations in New York City to taking a unit of cadets over to Paris and led the Bastille Day Parade, which was fantastic. At that time, the French, if you remember, were very supportive, very good to us after 9/11. In fact, at the end of the whole parade, they had a fire engine, and they gave the fire engine to the New York City Fire Department, which was really something special because of what they had suffered in 9/11.
Wow, remarkable. Yeah.
So there was an awful lot going on at West Point, and I think we did a good job in preparing the cadets to be future combat leaders, and I think that really is, for me, a great accomplishment that I can look back on that will play forever. It was interesting when I took the job as superintendent. The chief of staff talked to me, and he said, the influence of a chief of staff of the Army goes for 4 or 5 years. The influence of a superintendent at the academy goes for a generation. And he was exactly right. I see my cadets now, the ones that were there during 2001 to 6, rising in the ranks. They're probably colonels now, some heading toward general. But that influence that we started back there is coming into play now as they become the leadership of the Army.
That's awesome. Similar note, I understand you. This is just a fun fact I came across, I guess, when I was reading up on you. You handed over the reins, I guess you could say, to a former classmate, right? Isn't that correct?
Yes.
When you, yeah.
Right. He actually was battalion commander, a division commander. I'm sorry, a division commander. And what we were starting to see is some of the enlisted soldiers who served in Iraq or Afghanistan decided to go to West Point. So all of a sudden, we had combat experienced cadets. And when you serve in combat, you wear a right patch. Unit you were with is on your right arm. And we had very few faculty members and others that had right arm patches. So I mentioned to the chief of staff we really needed a right arm 3-star to lead West Point because the cadets were coming in. And at one time we had 100 cadets who had come out of the Army carrying those right arm patches. So that changes the character of West Point too. All of a sudden the cadets look up to these combat experienced cadets and want to know everything that happened. And you have to. So one of the things we did was we started moving the faculty over there in their areas of expertise. to help the division commanders in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and they would come back with their right arm patches and experiences so they could share them with the cadets in the classroom. That's important. That's important that the cadets can look up to somebody, talk to them about what they saw, and how they coped with the experiences that they got over there in combat. And it's all part of the educational experience at the academy.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful. I can imagine that was quite the experience for a lot of those cadets who maybe hadn't yet experienced that. So that's incredible. Thank you. So, continuing the story of Dr. Lennox, your post military career, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on pain. As I mentioned previously, Pain Resources, a publication we talk about everything A to Z, chronic pain. I can only imagine that 35 years of active duty service can take a toll on your body, either mentally or physically. I'm sure you have something to
Both.
say to that. I was wondering maybe if you could touch on maybe some significant stresses on your body, maybe some that have followed you into your civilian life.
Well, I think that after that much time, it does wear on your body. I think if you're talking pain, I think of the young ones. Probably the toughest part of being superintendent was attending the funerals of those cadets that you had trained, you had taught, just tough business. But then I also visited them at Walter Reed. When they came back, they lost legs. Tough kids, tough kids. But many of them were on pain medication. And some told me that the toughest part was getting off of that medication. That can be really traumatic for them. So I think anything we can do to help them in that regard. The other side, just getting out of military service is tough. Some have likened it to you being the mailbag on a train, and you get left off at the station going 100 miles an hour, and that train keeps going. And you're moving at 100 miles an hour, and you're stopped all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I remember when I first got out, one of the maybe funny stories would be we came up on a weekend, and my wife asked me what we were going to do on the weekend. And I came back to her and said, hey, what do we need weekends for? We had not had a weekend in years.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and said, you need help. And she was probably right. On the serious side, and that was probably serious too. But on another side, I've had one of my cadets developed into. She was a PhD. She is a PhD in psychology, and one of the pieces she worked on was transition, and she talked about the toughness, what it takes to go through that transition. Again, if you're in the military, you've got a single focus on the mission. You've got people on your left and right. You fight for, they fight for you. You don't have that necessarily in civilian life, and that transition can be traumatic. And I think it's that causes PTSD in some ways. I know people come back from combat with PTSD, but even that transition out of the military into civilian life can be very, very tough for people. So yeah, it does occur. It's real, and it's problematic.
Yeah. Do you find that that's a difficult thing for the civilian population to understand? Do you find that veterans are having difficulties finding help or seeking help because they don't feel like they're understood by a psychiatrist who may have never served or a doctor who may have never served? Do you think that that's a hurdle that a lot of veterans have to overcome?
I think many are equipped to do it, but I don't think veterans always have that trust in a person who hasn't done what they've done. And I think when you get into a group in particular that they do not carry that experience that you carry, uh, can be very tough because you don't trust them, you don't know if they understand you, and sometimes it makes your healing process a lot slower because you don't engage. Um, I even saw some of this at St. Leo University,
Mm.
where the veterans would sit in the back of the classroom and the students in the front, and sometimes they'd never meet, they'd never talk to each other.
Mm.
It's they seem to gather together when they can, they talk together when they can, and I think that's where some difference is made.
And so on a very similar note, as we had mentioned at the top of the interview, you currently are the ambassador for Heroes Mile Addiction Recovery Center. Can you tell me how it is you came to be affiliated with Heroes Mile and why you think that it's such an important organization?
Sure, and I think it is a very good organization. Um, when our great president of 18 years retired from St. Leo University, um,
Dr. Kirk, correct?
Dr.
Yeah.
Kirk, it divided the board as we looked at the successor. Half wanted one individual, half wanted another. At that point, the chairman, in order to get the board back together again, came to me and he said, "Hey, would you take St. Louis University? You ran WestPoint, can you do this?" And after some thought, I said, "Yes, I'd go ahead and do it." And for 3 years, took it on, and we hired the provost, who eventually took over, developed a strategy going forward. Uh, and at 3 years, I felt it was a good time to depart. On the way out the door, one of the board members came to me, John Pisciano, and John heads Oglethorpe, which has, I think it's 11 mental health hospitals. And he was frustrated. He said, "Listen, I work with veterans all the time. I get 30 days to work with them. I do my best, let them go, and they're back in again. We've got to take care of that problem. How do we do it?" So we sat down together, and I brought my experiences from the military and what I saw at St. Leo and what I saw at Walter Reed. I would go up to visit one of my wounded uh, former cadets, and the doctor would say, "Well, listen, he hasn't talked to any of us. He hasn't told us what happened. Uh, so don't expect anything." And I just walk in and say, "What happened?" And he'd talk for 15 minutes.
Hmm.
I think you've got to have military to military to fully understand what that person's going through. John and I talked. We came up with the idea of Heroes Mile. He's got the experience in taking care of PTSD, alcohol, drugs, MST, sexual trauma. And we put together the program. The key concept is we hired as many veterans as we could, for the doctor, the therapist, the nurses, and put that together. We're finding that they do talk. We've had some outstanding discussions with them. They like the concept, and we've had great results. Persistence in Heroes Mile is way above anything else, and recidivism is down considerably. So we feel like we're making a difference, and we think Heroes Mile is very special.
Do you think that veteran to veteran support is the way to go for veterans who may be struggling with mental health
100%.
issues? Yeah. Um,
100%. And we think so much about that we're going to try to take it as a model and test it, see if our results are as good as we think they are, and we think they are, and pass it off to anybody who wants to use that. We have no claim to it, but we're finding that veterans helping veterans makes a big difference.
that's powerful. So if somebody would like to reach out to Heroes Mile, if somebody knows someone that maybe needs to reach out to Heroes Mile, how could they do so?
Well, they can certainly look at our website, Heroes Mile, and then we have a telephone number people can call, It's 866-407-0699. Call that number and we'll work you through the process so that you can get to the to Heroes Mile.
Well, that's great, Dr. Lennox. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know you're probably a busy man. Once again, for everybody that's been listening or watching, we've been talking to Dr. William Lennox, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General and current ambassador for Heroes Mile Addiction Recovery Center. Dr. Lennox, thank you again for joining me today. It's been an honor to speak with you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach.